Hello everyone and welcome to the 100 Movie Marathon, a series where I count down my favorite films of all time, starting from number 100 down to number 1. Today for number 85, we're returning to the superhero genre to explore a movie that was instrumental to the MCU moving forward. No, not you. Get out of here. I'm talking about Captain America: Civil War. Captain America: Civil War was released on May 6, 2016 and was directed by the Russo brothers. This was the 13th film within the Marvel Cinematic Universe and marked a turning point for the franchise. You see, up to this point, the Avengers were seemingly unbeatable. Sure, there were a few hiccups and missteps along the way, but for the most part, whenever the team was together, you had no chance of beating them. And not to spoil what happened in the MCU after the events of this film, but it was important to the MCU that the Avengers be separated and therefore weaker. Whenever past superhero franchises have attempted slamming in a ton of characters, particularly new ones, into a single film, it normally came across as cluttered and the studio simply meddling for the sake of setting up future installments. But this is the MCU we're talking about here. If any studio could smash in a bunch of characters into one film and make it work, it's this one. So what are you waiting for? Get to your closest American flag and order you some shawarma, and let's get in to Captain America: Civil War. I'm changing up the format of these videos and I'm going deep into the plot, so if you have not seen this movie, go ahead and watch it and then come back to the video. We open the film with the current Avengers team doing battle against a terrorist group seeking to unleash a deadly virus upon the world. Our heroes are kicking names and taking butts when Wanda, also known as the Scarlet Witch, accidentally unleashes an explosive on a building, harming civilians. One thing that immediately sticks out about this scene is the action. The Russo brothers came back from the Winter Soldier and doubled down on their style of action and giving you that more grounded, shaky feeling, as well as truly displaying how powerful Steve Rogers truly is as Captain America. Whenever this guy kicks someone in this film, you feel it. Something else that stood out in this scene is that you see how the Russo brothers also developed in how they shoot action. In this film, they needed to display a wide array of powers outside of the relatively bare-knuckle, boots-on-the-ground feel of Cap and Black Widow. In this scene, you can tell that while they are maintaining their signature style from Winter Soldier, they're also taking a step forward, sort of signaling how the action in future Avengers films would look. Anyway, moving forward with the plot, it's hammered home in this film that the Avengers, while being a net positive on the world, have inadvertently caused serious harm to civilians. In just their two films, we've seen the destruction of New York City as well as the fictional country of Sokovia. And Tony Stark / Iron Man feels heavy remorse for this amount of civilian loss. Which, to be completely fair, Ultron was kinda his fault. Sure, he didn't know that he was releasing a bloodthirsty robot on humanity, but he still did it. A woman even approaches Stark, blaming him for the death of her son while they were in battle. This, along with Wanda's incident in the opening scene, is what sets the stage for the rest of the film. And that is in the form of what's called the Sokovia Accords. The Sokovia Accords basically state that the Avengers cannot act unless the United Nations tells them that they can. Because of the Accords, we see two different factions of the team take shape. One in favor of the Accords, believing that their very presence invites danger, and the other who believes that since their danger has already been invited, they need to be in a position to fight it without asking for permission. With Tony Stark leading the group that is in favor of the Accords, and Steve Rogers leading the group that is opposed. This conflict is the culmination in not just what we've seen in every MCU film up to this point, but also in the story arcs of these two characters. After the events of Winter Soldier, Steve has never been less trustworthy of his government. A man who in his first movie practically bled red, white, and blue has now been lied to so much that he's now more willing to become a vigilante rather than a law-abiding man. Now, some backstory here. Tony's father is the one that originally injected Steve Rogers with the super soldier serum back in the 1940s. And it's hinted at in the previous films that Tony actually resents Steve because of the way that his father looked up to him. That Steve was practically a perfect human, sort of like an older brother that Tony had to live in the shadow of his entire life. For someone in his guilt-ridden position we find him in, whose girlfriend has left him and has decades worth of resentment built up towards Steve, it makes sense that we now see these two guys at odds. The Accords also serve as a way for Tony to atone for his past sins and prove to the world as well as himself that he's on the side of the innocent. Whereas for Steve, the Accords are the greatest example of the government wanting to tell him what he can and can't do after he's been lied to at the highest level. This is not only a battle for the future of all of the Avengers, it is a personal battle for these two characters. After the Accords are presented, we the audience meet our villain for the film, Zemo. We're not given much info about Zemo initially, other than he has a cool European accent and he's really interested in Mission Report 1991, but we will learn more about him, just stay tuned. The Sokovia Accords are then set to be signed in Vienna by the members of the Avengers choosing to endorse it. Here we're introduced to the leader of Wakanda, King T'Chaka, and his son, who I'm sure totally won't play a big role in this film, Prince T'Challa. All is well until suddenly an explosion occurs, injuring many and killing King T'Chaka. It's then revealed with camera footage that Steve's old buddy, Bucky Barnes, otherwise known as the Winter Soldier, is the one that set the bomb. Refusing to believe that Bucky had anything to do with this, Steve sets out to find him before the world governments can. And by before, I mean exactly 1 minute and 42 seconds before police are smashing down the door and smoke bombs are being thrown into his apartment. Talk about good timing. This results in a great action sequence featuring Bucky ruthlessly trying to escape while Cap tries to save both Bucky from the police as well as the police from Bucky. We also get in the sequence the introduction of Black Panther, who's revealed to be, what? King T'Challa? No! On a serious note, Black Panther has been one of my favorite heroes in the MCU up to this point, and the actor who played him excellently, by the way, Chadwick Boseman, tragically passed away in August 2020. I loved him in this, his solo film, as well as the other two Avengers movies that followed. The man battled cancer while actively continuing his acting career and starring in some fantastic movies the last few years of his life. Even if you're not the biggest fan of superhero films, I feel like that's something that we can all universally respect about the guy. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. T'Challa, Steve, and Bucky wind up being captured by the police as they're transported to the city's police HQ. Tony's there to greet them as he tries to urge Steve again to sign the Accords. The two men sit alone face to face as Tony bears his soul to Steve and is shot down once again, building up the resentment more and more as Tony knows the morally righteous Steve Rogers won't sign because he truly doesn't believe it's the right thing to do. Twisting the knife once more that no matter what Tony Stark does, he will never be Steve Rogers. Meanwhile, we see Zemo again as he impersonates an interrogator and forces Bucky to go full Manchurian Candidate whenever he utters key words designed by Hydra to morph him into the Winter Soldier. This leaves Tony, Natasha Romanoff, T'Challa, Sharon Carter, Sam Wilson, and Steve to try to keep Bucky from fleeing the building and causing further harm in his violent state. I also love how the Russo brothers shot this scene, showing how their shaky cam style can be adapted given the different members of the Avengers skill sets and their power abilities. And Chris Evans flexes his muscles. Okay, Chris Evans, we get it. You work out way more than any of us. You do not have to flex on us like that. Good God. But because of Steve's muscles, he's able to stop the Winter Soldier before he's able to escape in a helicopter. Now, back to his normal state of being, Bucky tells Sam and Steve that he is not the only Winter Soldier. In fact, there are other agents kept on ice over the years just like him that have the ability to wipe out governments if they so desire. Or should I say, if the person controlling them desires. They all believe this to be Zemo's grand plan after he was given the coordinates of where those agents are located by Bucky in his Winter Soldier state. In order to stop Zemo, Steve and his crew realize that they're going to have to find a way out of Bucharest, which is probably going to involve some form of conflict with Tony and his team. Both sides know that a fight is coming and they have to recruit some new soldiers. Steve brings aboard Hawkeye, who rescues Wanda from the Avengers compound where she had been held the entire movie up to this point, and Sam brings on Ant-Man, played by Paul Rudd. So those are Steve's new recruits, so who is Tony gonna now bring into the fold? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, right here we get the introduction of Peter Parker, also known as Spider-Man, into the MCU. This appearance has so much more behind it that we don't see on the screen, so I feel like the best way to break down how this actually happened is by going through a brief timeline of events. Alright, so let's flash back to 1999 for a moment. You know, The Matrix is out, destroying box office numbers. Wild Wild West is a massive hit, of course, as we all know. In 1999, Marvel is dead broke. So they decide to sell off the film rights to some of their major characters, including Spider-Man, to Sony. So now we have the time span of 2001 to 2007. Sony produces the original Sam Raimi trilogy, which included a disappointing third film where they tried to shoehorn in too many villains. So now fast forward to 2012 to 2014. Sony produces a rebooted duology starring Andrew Garfield, which included a disappointing second film where they tried to shoehorn in too many villains. I'm starting to notice a trend here. So now, after the disappointing results of that second film in 2015, we see Sony and Disney strike a deal to share the rights of Spider-Man. And I can't overemphasize how huge of a deal this was. Seriously, no one thought that this would ever happen. I mean, why would Sony want to share the film rights for its most profitable superhero? Well, in case you didn't notice by my little timeline, they sort of dropped the ball on the direction of Spider-Man after The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in 2014. Honestly, really good foresight by the executives of Sony, realizing that they were going to continue to see diminishing returns on that franchise, and they needed to find a new way of doing the character. And what better way than partnering with the studio that was producing the best superhero films, well, arguably the best superhero films of the last several years up to that point. And this has now led to 3 fantastic solo films produced by both studios that has just churned out avalanches of cash for both parties and has made Tom Holland a household name. Which, by the way, I love Tom Holland's portrayal of Peter Parker. Up to this point, we hadn't gotten an actor to portray the character who actually played it off like he's just some kid from Queens figuring it out as he goes along. In this film, we see a Spider-Man who is really new to the scene and will basically do anything to gain the approval of Tony Stark. And this includes taking part in one of the best superhero fight scenes ever put to screen. I'm talking about the battle at the Bucharest airport. This scene is amazing. It's hero versus hero, friend against friend. New characters showing off their powers while other familiar characters showing off what's been built up in their arsenal up to this point. This is absolutely the turning point in the MCU in my opinion. To help set the scene for Infinity War, the Avengers needed to be separated. And the ramifications of this battle is exactly what lead to that separation. Their conflict has gotten so bad to the point where words just won't work anymore. These are 2 different groups of the same team set in stone. One will be known as the Avengers from here on out, and the other are, in the government's eyes, criminals who now need to be put behind bars. Something else I love about this scene is how we see quite a bit of their character personalities come out while they're fighting. It's not just straight-faced battle. We get one-liners from Spider-Man reminding us that he's just a kid. We have jokes from Ant-Man, cutting dialogue between Steve and Tony. There's so much personality ingrained in this fight, which makes it even more engaging. It's both awesome for viewers to see and very important for these characters and their futures, as well as the future of this world we've all grown to love. It was so important for the filmmakers not to screw up this scene and have it deliver on all of those levels. But I mean, for the fight choreographers, the screenwriters, the directors, everyone, all of that hard work and effort completely paid off because this scene is amazing. One of the most engaging battles I've ever watched in a movie. Eventually, Steve's team realizes that in order for the mission to be successful, quite a bit of them have to lose in the process. They sacrifice their freedom so Steve and Bucky can get to their plane to go stop Zemo from unleashing havoc. Tony eventually receives intel that maybe Bucky wasn't the person who unleashed the bomb at the Accord signing. And in fact, it was Zemo with a mask that resembled Bucky. This means that Bucky is 100% innocent of this crime and Tony has been wrong about him this entire time. This leads him to track down Steve and Bucky and help them put a stop to what they believe is Zemo's master plan of unleashing all of the super soldiers. Except when they arrive at the compound, they realize that all of the super soldiers have been killed. This is whenever Zemo drops a major bomb on Tony, Bucky, and Steve. It turns out that in the infamous mission report he was looking for, Zemo found footage of Bucky as the Winter Soldier killing Tony's mom and dad as part of a mission, showing Tony the death of his parents in front of his eyes. Now, I know I just got done praising the battle at the airport as one of the greatest superhero fight scenes I've ever seen, but it comes behind the battle that ensues after this information is unveiled. Fueled by pure rage, vengeance, and years of pent-up grief from his parents' passing, Tony unleashes on Bucky and Steve. Steve begs Tony to stop as he tries to remind him that Bucky was not in control at the time of his parents' murder. That it wasn't the man that he's fighting now, it was the Winter Soldier. But all of this comes on deaf ears as Tony doesn't care and he seeks pure vengeance for the death of his parents, and the murderer is right in front of him in his eyes. This is when we finally get Iron Man versus Captain America. Two men who have been at odds with one another in the ultimate battle. Steve has to now definitively battle Tony to save Bucky. This scene has so much raw emotion and built-in story packed into every single punch that I can see why they made this the finale of the film. It'd be really easy for this film to culminate in a huge battle at the airport with all of the heroes present, but the Russo brothers and the writers of this film knew better than to do that. At the core of this film, it's about two leaders with very different outlooks on life. And now the stakes are incredibly high. Tony wants to kill the man who murdered his parents, and Steve has to try to save his friend, who is also the last person who truly knows him at his core. This battle ends with Steve disarming Tony, saving Bucky, and finally putting down the shield, fulfilling his character arc from the committed soldier to the on-the-run fugitive. It's then revealed to us that Zemo's primary motivation was the death of his family that was crushed in the Battle of Sokovia, the battle that the Avengers took part in to defeat Ultron. However, he's apprehended by T'Challa, who learns from seeing Tony that being fueled by vengeance is not the right path, as he no longer seeks blood for his father's untimely murder, and building him up to be the king that we would later see in his solo film. Steve is seen rescuing his faction of heroes from their prison cells as Tony and his group retreat to the Avengers compound, fracturing the team and leaving the audience on uncertain grounds as to what to expect from the movies moving forward now that the Avengers were separated. Steve affirms in a letter to Tony that, regardless of their differences in battles, he'll always be there if he needs him. Not the ending you expected? Yeah, me neither. I remember when I saw this for the first time wondering where in the world they would go next. This movie struck home as one of the best comic book movies that I had ever seen at the time. It perfectly balanced Steve's story arc while also featuring nearly every character previously introduced, introducing new ones into the fold, and teeing up the plot for the conclusion of the Infinity Saga. With Winter Soldier, the Russo brothers proved that they could make an excellent superhero film. But with Civil War, the duo proved that they were the right guys for the job to helm the culmination of the entire Infinity Saga. Plot ultimately wasn't lost in the spectacle of it all, as we got to see some of our most personal and emotional moments with Steve and Tony in all of the MCU films. This movie often gets labeled as Avengers 2.5, which I think is fair to an extent, seeing that all of the characters in the MCU are present at this time, aside from Thor and Hulk. But we shouldn't forget that through all of this, Steve is clearly the main character. It's from his perspective that we see the struggle of protecting a friend who's inadvertently done wrong. So is it an Avengers movie? Is it a Captain America movie? I say, who really cares? It's just a great movie with a compelling storyline and fantastic action scenes. It's everything that I could want out of an MCU movie and more. Alright, so that's Captain America's Civil War. Man, these videos are really hard whenever it comes to superhero films. They can be a real beast to do, and I am personally glad that I'm not going to be doing another one anytime soon. Oh God. This has been the 100 Movie Marathon, and I will see you next time for number 84, Batman Begins. Bye, guys.